She was dismissed the moment she stepped into the Thornhill mansion where the reading of the will was taking place. An old gray linen dress, a faded green cardigan, and quiet, flat shoes. Just enough to make the room full of heirs clad in silks. And sparkling diamonds cast her disdainful looks, sharp smiles hiding behind the mask of politeness. A man wearing a yellow tie spoke first, half laughing, half mocking. "Who let the maid in?" A young woman, her lips painted bright red and eyes as cold as ice, leaned in and whispered to her friend. Probably some failed ex-lover here to claim a share. Ivy Walker stood motionless at the back of the room, her hand lightly gripping the strap of her faded bag. She didn't respond, didn't back down, didn't utter a word in defense. To them, she was nothing but a shadow, a stranger in a room built on wealth, status, and the right bloodline. But they were wrong. For the woman standing silently before their storm of contempt was the lawful wife of Logan Thornhill, the very person all of them were eagerly waiting to divide the inheritance with. And today's will reading was not a simple ritual. It was a trap, a test crafted by the very hands of the woman they had just insulted. The old linen dress brushed lightly across the marble floor as Ivy Walker, the slim black woman with silent steps, crossed the grand threshold of Thornhill Mansion. On her shoulder, the faded cardigan drooped, as if it too could feel its owner's displacement in this glamorous space. No one greeted her. No one looked at her as an equal. The first looks shot toward her were like icy arrows, sharp, probing, and filled with contempt that needed no disguise. Preston Reed, standing near the fireplace with a glass of champagne, squinted at her, his mouth twisting into a mocking smile. Marissa Reed, in a fiery red dress like blood, glanced Ivy up and down, then leaned in to whisper in Preston's ear, her voice sweet like poison. "The maid must have taken a wrong turn." From across the room, Clara Simmons, the TikTok famous granddaughter, giggled. She secretly raised her phone, quickly snapping a few photos of Ivy, then turned her head to Elise Carter and whispered, "Look at that cardigan." "Vintage disaster. Looks like a poor ex-girlfriend in a cheap movie." The laughter spread like sharp little knives slicing through the air. But Ivy didn't stop. She didn't turn back. She simply tightened her grip on her modest fabric bag and walked straight ahead, her old worn shoes making no sound on the shiny stone floor. The Thornhill mansion that day felt like a foreign world full of those dressed in designer clothes, wearing diamonds, crowned by money and arrogance. And in the midst of them, Ivy was like a fragile blade of grass stepping into a stormy night. The crystal chandelier above sparkled brightly, reflecting off each face, but no light touched Ivy's deep brown eyes. Eyes silently carrying things that no one in the room was subtle enough to see. They saw a faded dress. They saw a nameless bag. They saw a quiet black girl, and they immediately concluded, no worth, doesn't belong, doesn't deserve to be here. To them, Ivy was just a stain on the red carpet they were stepping on. A laughable mistake in the grand picture of the will reading they believed they were ready to inherit. No one knew. No one guessed. The very person they were mocking would not only take away the kingdom they dreamed of, she would expose the true faces of each person in that suffocating room. But for now, Ivy stood silently, leaning against the wall by the large window. The wind from the Thornhill hills slipped through the glass, gently ruffling the stray hairs falling on her forehead. She remained silent, but that silence was not one of submission. It was the silence of a storm waiting to erupt. The pale light of an April morning filtered through the window, casting a faint yellowish hue over the room in Thornhill Mansion. But no light was enough to warm the chilling atmosphere that sent shivers down one's spine. Preston Reed, still standing arrogantly by the fireplace, straightened his flashy yellow tie before letting out a half laugh, half scoff. God, who let the maid in here like this? His voice rang out clearly, deliberately, like a stone thrown into the silence. A mocking laugh echoed from the opposite side. Marissa Reed, Preston's sister in a blood-red dress, elegantly adjusted her champagne glass as if she herself were the embodiment of the noble Thornhill lineage. Or maybe the cleaning lady heard rumors about our wealth and decided to try her luck. Marissa's words came like a sharp knife, sparking laughter from the group standing near the fireplace. Heads turned toward Ivy this time. Not just a off glance, but an outright attack. With eyes, with laughter, with contempt. From the corner of the room, Clara Simmons squinted, lifted her phone, and aimed the lens directly at Ivy. Snap, snap, snap. Clara tapped quickly on the screen, the corners of her mouth curling with glee. In less than a minute, Ivy Walker, standing alone with her tattered bag and her worn shoes, became a joke shared silently between devices and cruel glances. Yet Ivy stood there, immovable, unbothered, like a mountain that had weathered storms, fiercer than petty scorn. She did not fidget. She did not look down. Her posture remained simple but proud, an invisible crown on her head that no one could see through their gold-plated arrogance. Then the room shifted. A heavy wooden door opened at the far end, and Mr. Carlton, the family's long-trusted lawyer, stepped inside holding a thick, leather-bound folder. His arrival was like the start of an execution, each air suddenly sobering, standing taller, faces lifting with hope and greed barely masked under polite smiles. Carlton's eyes swept over the room before landing on Ivy. For a moment, there was a flicker, a tiny respectful nod no one else caught. He adjusted his glasses, moved to the heavy oak table at the center of the room, and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low and serious. "Thank you for gathering here today for the reading of Logan Thornhill's last will and testament." The room quieted. Laughter died. Clara Simmons quickly lowered her phone, pretending to be raptly attentive. Preston Reed leaned back smugly against the fireplace, while Marissa adjusted her crimson dress, crossing one leg over the other with lazy entitlement. Elise Carter flipped her glossy hair back, preparing herself for the performance of mourning that would soon be rewarded with riches. Carlton continued, "Before we proceed, Mr. Thornhill has left specific instructions that all who are present must remain in the room until the reading concludes. No exceptions." There were a few raised brows, but no one spoke. They were too eager for their share. Carlton opened the folder. The paper inside crackled, and Ivy Walker, standing still by the window, closed her eyes for just a second, steadying herself for the storm to come. Carlton adjusted his spectacles again, scanning the room before beginning to read, his voice deliberate and clear. "I, Logan Thornhill, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." A collective breath was held, like the whole room leaned forward invisibly. Carlton continued, "First, I wish to express my deep gratitude and love to the person who stood by me, not in times of fortune, but in times of illness, despair, and weakness." Whispers rippled among the airs, sly glances passing like notes, between students waiting for the teacher to turn his back. Preston grinned, already imagining the private jet he'd been planning to buy. Marissa smiled at her reflection in a nearby gilded mirror, whispering, "Finally," as if victory was inevitable. Clara checked her nails, filing a chip lazily, impatient. Elise adjusted her pearl earrings, as if preparing for her rightful crowning. None of them noticed how Carlton's eyes flicked again, barely to Ivy. They didn't see the slight tightening of his lips, the deep sorrow and respect woven into the old lawyer's features. "To my loyal family and descendants gathered here," Carlton read, the next word sharper, slicing through the air, "I leave my forgiveness." Silence. Sharp, aching silence. Frowns bloomed on the smooth, powdered faces. Eyebrows lifted in confusion. "Forgiveness?" Preston blurted, before catching himself. Carlton, ignoring him, pressed on. "I forgive you for your greed, your betrayals, your false affections shown only when my life was measured in days and dollars." A soft, collective gasp filled the room. Marissa's champagne glass trembled slightly against her manicured fingers. Clara stopped scrolling on her phone. Elise froze, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. Carlton turned a page with a slow, purposeful motion. As for my worldly possessions, he continued, I bequeath the entirety of the Thornhill Estate, properties, businesses, stocks, artworks, vehicles, assets, all financial holdings, to my lawful wife, Ivy Walker Thornhill. His voice echoed off the marble, a cannon blast in a room that had been so smugly sure of its triumph. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. No one moved. No one breathed. The words hung in the air, too massive, too impossible, too devastating to comprehend. Ivy, the woman they mocked, the maid they laughed at, the stain they wanted to erase. She was the wife, the lawful wife, the heir to everything. The room erupted. What? Preston barked, his voice breaking into a furious pitch. Marissa slammed, her glass down onto the nearby table, shattering the delicate crystal. Clara dropped her phone, the clatter loud in the stunned silence. Elise stumbled backward, her perfect heels slipping on the glossy floor. This is some joke! Marissa screamed, color rushing up her neck, staining her pale skin an ugly red. Carlton simply raised a hand, silencing the room with the gravity of truth. The marriage certificate, he said coldly, is valid, legal, and recorded. Logan Thornhill and Ivy Walker Thornhill were married 3 years ago in a private ceremony witnessed by myself and the late Dr. Ernest Bowden. Their union was known to few and desired by Logan himself to be kept private until after his death. Preston charged toward the table, grabbing the thick leather folder as if he could tear reality apart with his hands. No, this is fake. This, nobody. He jabbed a furious finger toward Ivy, who still stood silent, still untouched by their fury. She tricked him. She seduced him. She's a gold digger. Carlton's face hardened. Watch your words carefully, mister. Read, he said, his voice a low thunder. Mr. Thornhill was not a fool. He chose Mrs. Thornhill knowing her true character, something few of you sadly ever showed. Ivy stepped forward now, just one step, but it was like a stone dropping into a still pond, heads whipped toward her. Even the chandelier's light seemed to tremble in the wake of that simple motion. Ivy met their stares not with anger, not with arrogance, but with a steady, calm gaze that rooted them to the floor. In her eyes, there was a depth none of them could match, a depth earned through years of humility, patience, kindness, and suffering that not even their combined fortunes could purchase. I was never here for your approval, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling the room, pulling their breath from their bodies. I was here because he asked me to be, and now I'm here because he left me. Everything he built, because he trusted me more than he ever trusted any of you. Her words were not cruel. They were not bitter. They were simply true. And that made them more devastating than any shouted insult. Preston looked as if he ate haste, might charge her, but Marissa gripped his sleeve, holding him back with a hissed, "You'll ruin everything!" Clara, still crouched by her dropped phone, was crying now. Big, ugly sobs that didn't belong on Instagram. Elise had collapsed into a gilded chair, her perfect composure shattered like the glass at her feet. Carlton continued, his voice implacable. Reading the final stipulations of the will, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of their greed. There would be no shares divided among the family, no trust funds, no sudden bonuses to their failing businesses or shopping addictions. Everything, every diamond, every acre, every dollar belonged to Ivy Walker Thornhill. The air inside Thornhill Mansion thickened until it was almost hard to breathe. Eyes that once mocked Ivy now burned with hatred, panic, desperate calculation. Money was their oxygen, and Ivy had just taken every last breath away. Marissa Reed finally found her voice, shrill and trembling with barely contained fury. "This isn't over! We'll contest the will! We'll drag you through court!" You think you can just walk in here and steal what's rightfully ours? Ivy regarded her coolly, not even blinking. You'll find, Ivy said softly, that Logan prepared for this too. Carlton, as if on cue, pulled out a second folder. This one thinner, but no less important, and placed it on the table with a decisive thud. Contained herein, he said crisply, are signed testimonies, recorded statements, and evidence of the intentions of Mr. Thornhill, including handwritten letters detailing the poor character, financial irresponsibility, and personal misconduct of each and every one of you. His voice hardened. Any attempt to contest this will be met with immediate countersuits for fraud, elder abuse, and extortion. Your secrets, he said, voice dropping ominously, will become public record. It was a death knell. Preston's bravado shattered. His face paled to the color of ashes. Marissa's fingers trembled so violently, her rings rattled against her champagne flute. Clara whimpered, curling in on herself. Elise Carter, always the shrewdest, looked like she might vomit. For there was no safe harbor from exposure now. Ivy knew. Logan had known. The entire estate had been a gilded trap, and they had danced. Straight into it. And still, Ivy stood, as calm as a mountain under a storm. Her hands gently rested on the strap of her worn bag. That bag, which they had mocked, contained not designer makeup or stolen trinkets, but the original handwritten letters from Logan himself. Letters filled with love, trust, and sorrow over the family he could never fix, but had finally seen clearly. Carlton wasn't finished. Furthermore, he said, his voice now almost cold with righteous satisfaction, effective immediately, you are all to vacate Thornhill Mansion. The property belongs solely to Mrs. Thornhill. Another boom in the silence. Preston swore, violently under his breath. Marissa gave a high, thin laugh, on the edge of hysteria. Clara wailed openly, mascara running in streaks down her face. Elise Carter stood and smoothed her skirt with shaking hands, grasping for dignity. You can't throw us out! Marissa snarled, her face twisting with hate. Ivy finally allowed herself a small smile. Not smug, not cruel, just inevitable. You threw yourselves out, she said simply. Security, already alerted, beforehand by Carlton and Ivy, appeared quietly at the side entrances, large men in black suits, polite but immovable. One by one, the heirs of Thornhill, decked in jewels and arrogance, were escorted out of the mansion they thought would be theirs forever. The grand halls echoed with their furious protests, their weeping, their desperate, pleading voices fading into the distance. Ivy did not move until the last one had gone. The great doors closed with a resounding, final boom. Silence fell. A true silence now. Carlton gathered the papers back into his case, his old hand steady and sure. He looked at Ivy then, a deep sadness in his lined face. He loved you, you know, he said quietly. Ivy swallowed hard, the first crack in her perfect composure forming, shining wetly in her deep brown eyes. I know, she whispered. Carlton bowed slightly, not as a lawyer, but as a man paying respect to a queen. Without another word, he departed, leaving Ivy alone in the great Thornhill mansion. Ivy stood there for a long time, alone in the grand. Empty room, the gold and marble around her glinting like cold stars. She walked slowly to the center of the room, the faded hem of her old gray dress whispering across the flawless floors. Her fingers brushed the back of a chair, touched the coolness of the fireplace, the carved wood of the table. She remembered every moment. The nights spent tending to Logan when no nurse could be trusted. The long conversations in the garden when he felt like nothing but an old man waiting to die. She remembered his laugh, warm and rich, the way his eyes had lit up when he spoke of a second chance, not for his legacy, but for love. And here she was, a woman they had seen as a shadow, now standing as the owner of an empire. Ivy took a deep breath. She could almost hear Logan's voice in the back of her mind, amused and loving. "Go on, Ivy. Show them how strong you are." And so she would, or no, she would rebuild Thornhill, not in their image, but in hers. She would turn greed into generosity, arrogance into humility, cold marble into warm hearths. Already she had plans Logan had helped her draft in those final months. A plan to turn the Thornhill fortune into scholarships, shelters, hospitals. Real wealth. Real legacy. Ivy pulled her old cardigan tighter around her shoulders and turned, walking toward the grand staircase. Each step she climbed was a step away from their scorn, their laughter, their disbelief. Each step was a declaration that she was not less because she had less. She was more because she had survived more. At the top of the stairs, Ivy paused, looking down at the mansion she now ruled. A small, private smile curved her lips. Down below, the light from the chandelier flickered, casting hundreds of tiny reflections on the marble floor, like stars scattered across the heavens. And in the center of it all, Ivy Walker Thornhill stood alone but unbroken, the queen of a kingdom she had won, not through deceit or blood, but through heart, loyalty, and a strength none of them had ever bothered to see. The Thornhill Mansion, once a house built on pride and cruelty, would now become a beacon. A new legacy was being written, not with greed, but with grace. And it began not with a bloodline, nor a bank account, but with a simple black woman, in a faded cardigan, and worn shoes, who they had humiliated, until they realized too late that she had inherited everything.